Material for the brain. Conversations for thinking bodies. Hello and welcome to Material for the Brain podcast. Today is our 27th episode and my guest for this conversation is Simon Meyer. Simon is a performer, a choreographer, musician, festival curator and a workshop facilitator. He was born in Austria and studied at the Vienna State Opera Ballet School and at the Performing Arts and Research Studios in Brussels. I got to know Simon many years ago when I moved to Vienna. His choreographic work was an inspiration for me and my own artistic practice. Recently, we got into a short exchange over social media and it sparked the wish to dive into a longer conversation with him here in the podcast. In our conversation, we were asking ourselves, why do we do what we do? And where is the source of the fire that moves us to act in the world? We talked about trance state and its potential effect on our well-being. We talked about education and art making and their respective roles in the social fabric. This is our first conversation in this format, but I'm pretty sure that it won't be the last one. So without further ado, here is Simon Meyer. Hello, Simon. Welcome to my podcast. How are you?
Hello. I'm good.
Yeah, thank you for taking the... A bit what?
The sun is shining.
Sun is shining. Yeah, that's very, very important. Actually, in Vienna, it doesn't shine today. So yeah, thank you for coming to my podcast. I wanted to first check, how are you? Where are you? What are you doing nowadays? Where do I catch you in this particular moment?
Yeah, at this moment I'm here in Frankfurt. I'm teaching at the Hochschule für Musik und Darstellende Kunst and in the dance department, and I'm doing a guest choreography here. I've been traveling a lot in the last weeks again, so I'm finding myself back on a bit more back on track than before, because there was a lot of closings of theaters and venues, and so there was not so much touring possible. And now I'm starting to be on tour again with my performances and also my workshops.
Do you teach often in dance schools? Do you do like is it a big part of your work?
Yeah, now I found back my love again for teaching, and therefore I'm really happy that regularly I'm teaching again as a guest choreographer or as a guest teacher or in form of seminars in different institutions, schools, or also self-organized workshops. And also I also do online workshops. Like I do an online workshop every week on Friday morning to dance out of your bed and get into the state of being moved, which is already there when you're sleeping, I guess. And that's happening on Zoom. So yeah, the love for teaching is back, and it comes in a good moment. I have the feeling.
And how is it for you personally? When you come to teach, do you differentiate kind of between your teacher persona and your artist persona, or is it really merged within your teaching practice?
Well, one cannot be without the other. That I found out. So giving workshops, facilitating really helps me in my artistic work, and the other way around. And so in that way, it's also interesting what's happening now as like doing a guest choreography in a school, because there sometimes I also realized that the facilitator or the teacher is sometimes a bit negotiating with the choreographer, because the choreographer has to go towards a product-oriented work, has to go towards a performance, a piece that has to be made with the students. And the workshop facilitator sometimes doesn't really understand that concept of like now there is something much more interesting going on at this moment. We really have to use what is here right now and to follow that instead of going again for the product and framing it and so on and so on.
Hmm.
So that's an interesting negotiation that I'm in right now between the facilitator and the choreographer, or the teacher and the choreographer.
Yeah, I also see it a little bit from the point that, like, when in the occasion that I had to come and choreograph for students, I couldn't separate the notion that that they are in an educational program, so sometimes also in private school where they pay a lot of money to, and then like they need to learn something, and sometimes just pursuing my artistic visions uh, can be hindering that. So like it's different when you're working with performer and you pay them, and then and then there's a certain work relation that you, let's say, can demand more, even though that I don't see it completely like this, because I think that, yeah, I mean, I don't know what you think about it, but I mean, when I was, there was one choreographer I worked with, his name is Martin Nachbar, and he told us, it was part of my education, and he told us that he thinks that that when he comes to the studio, the first thing he wants to see is who are the people and what they need to experience. So in a way, he puts really aside his own visions and wishes, and first, like, he sees what is there. And I find it very inspiring in the sense that, like, okay, the material is not wood or whatever. It's like it's not a dead thing. It's people, and people. You have to consider that fact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I can relate to what you're saying in the way that for me the learning now was really to again and again just take a step back, and to see, okay, just like Martin, like you were describing now with Martin, to see that this is not about my reputation as a choreographer. This cannot be about my reputation as a choreographer. This cannot be about my ego as a choreographer, because here it is about the people. It is about their process, and especially in an educational context, even more. I mean, it should be. I have the feeling it should be like this as well in my choreographic work outside of teaching of an educational context, but especially in an educational context, I find it even more important to this learning that I got of it's really about the students, it's about their process, it's about what they need to experience at this moment. And the same goes for the product then. If the product is not completely perfect, or whatever perfection means in that context, then to just take this step back and to say, okay, this was about the experience now. And that's also what I realize on the way there in the rehearsals, where then the facilitator or the teacher and the choreographer can meet in the moments where it becomes about the experience, because that's also important for the choreographer, that there is an authentic experience happening that can be then eventually be brought on stage, and that's where the two of them agree. Okay, this experience is now really necessary, and this is really valuable to go into that now inside a rehearsal, and to then sometimes change the way also, not to hold on to this to any fixed plan or fixed structure, but to be able to also deviate from it, or to change the path there.
I mean, you said something now that provoked my curiosity, that you said, like, yeah, if that ideally you would like it also to be present in your artistic work, that that it's not about just the ego and the desire to, the authorship of you doing something in the world. But yeah, but there's a certain problem that I encounter in the short time that I've been in part of this cycle of application in Vienna, where I think you're also familiar with, because you also get some of your funding from Vienna, if I'm not mistaken, no? and it's kind of built, it's like kind of the incentive structure behind the funding that really prevents that process of decentering the ego. And I was wondering, like, what like how, maybe if you have what you would be your thought about it, and how did you practically deal with it? Because I remember when I was applying for the first time, and that was together with another artist, Claire Lefebvre. We were doing a residency, which actually somehow relates to how I got to know you, with a woman called Anita Kaya, and she was guiding us through the first application we did. And I really remember that she told us, like, look, when you meet with the curators, after you send your application and you have a personal meeting with them to discuss your project, you really have to show you how important and how you're burning for the project. And that's really like, that's the most important thing to be done now. And if there is no, and if this feeling is missing, then it will be very hard to fund it, because like, if you don't believe fully that what you're doing is so important, why would the city of Vienna and the people who are responsible to disseminate the funding, why would they believe in it? And then I find it that it's very difficult to get into that process and at the same time, you know, not developing self-importance, because you really need to believe in it. And then like and sometimes and in certain projects that I applied, I did believe that they are extremely important, and that's something that we should discuss now culturally. And it's very difficult. It was very difficult for me to decenter myself and to remember it's not about me. And as a teacher, I find it much more easy because of the, you know, like, okay, the situation enforces that. How do you deal with it? Or I don't know, do you agree with this first statement, that with the advice that I got, or maybe you have a different completely point of view?
I do agree with the point of the fire. And this is also, well, there I have to again come back actually to the situation now with doing a guest choreography, because this is a very central point also for me to share with the students, for example, to see where is the fire, where does the fire start, where is the spark that makes us do things, that makes us be moved, that makes us go in a certain direction, that comes out of a place that is not necessarily bound to any of the aspects in us that are maybe deviating from a way that is actually coming from deeper, you know. So where is this spark that is maybe coming more from an intuitive aspect, or from an intuitive part? And this is also, so this is also what we're working on. For example, what I work on a lot in the workshops and also in the guest choreographies, to just discover that spark, that fire. Like, for example, one of the questions that we were asking now, or that I proposed now to the students, was to ask, why do I dance? So imagine you're in an educational context, and most people only ask that question maybe in the end of their education, or even later. Like in my case, I only started asking that question, like, I don't know, maybe 3 years ago. And all of a sudden the big crisis is there. So I ask myself, but why am I doing what I'm doing? Why do I dance? And then there is no answer all of a sudden, and then there is panic, because I've never been asking that question before. So this is what I try to introduce a bit earlier now, at least with others, to soon enough understand where is the fire, and is it still there, and how can I cultivate that fire, and when is it lower, and when is it higher, and in that way. In that way, it becomes very much about self-care, about the contact, self-contact, about the contact to myself and to anything else as well. But to always see, like, okay, and where am I standing now, and what is there to be acknowledged at this moment? Does it have to be acknowledged at this moment that I just really don't have any fire for something, and I will not be able to go in front of the curators and defend my project? Well, then what has to be acknowledged? And it doesn't mean that the acknowledgement is has as a consequence that I will not do that project, or that I will never have that fire for the project again. It's just at this moment there is an acknowledgement of like, okay, I really don't have any fire for it. And already by the acknowledgement, a lot of times I observe that the fire is coming back, because something releases inside me, and it's just like, oh, finally there's maybe an aspect in me that doesn't, there's maybe only one aspect in me that doesn't want to do that project, and that one is listened to at this moment. So that aspect is like, yes, finally he's listening to me, so it can relax. And then the other aspects that are really interested in that project can finally be there and be like, yes, we can do it, because that one calmed down and it got the attention that it needed in a way. Yeah, and in that way, I do agree with the whole fire story and seeing where the spark comes from, and also But the thing is that nothing can be forced in that, I find, and this is an important. That was an important learning for me to just accept also that if I have to defend the project, and if I constantly have the feeling that I have to defend it, and that I have to even make up stories about it, or that I have to, because there's, sometimes in that system, or also in the funding system, things just are, as you say, are a bit hard to match with the actual reality of an artistic life and of an artistic practice. It's not always the reality that a year before, or 2 years before, or 4 years before, in case of structural funding, that you know already all the projects you're going to do, that you have already a clear, a very detailed and clear concept about it. I mean, it's always good, I think, to go into the vision when writing a project, and to see what is that vision, what is that download, and to maybe bring it on paper once. But at the same time, it's just not always the case that everything is so clear already so much time before. Or that also that writing or talking about a project is not always is not what should be obligatory in my perspective.
Yeah, no, for me, the main question that came from it is, again, like how to, there is a problem that you need to create some kind of a hierarchy of values in order to be able to judge who is going to get the funding. You can, unless you're going to experiment with disseminating it in an egalitarian manner to everyone who applies, and I don't know if that's going to function. So at least now that's how it works. And then there is there is a competition. And within this competition, normally in competition that involves individuals who are competing with one another, normally like the short-term strategy of collaboration doesn't lead to the best results. So like if I'm competing against you to get the funding, if I'm gonna collaborate you and help you while I'm also trying to get the money, most time in short-term, for short-term goals, it's not the best way to do. So then it creates a certain environment where at least that's how I experience it, I didn't experience the dance scene as a place that there's like a lot of mutual appreciation, but there's a lot of critique and judgment, and fair enough, that's what it is. And yeah, I think that the reason I was questioning it, because for me, it didn't do good for my mental health. And I was also questioning, like, how could I be involved in a process that I want to comment on culture and brings, and to some extent by doing it, let's say, to question the nature of reality and what could be better, and at the same time hurt myself and others in the process. So it's like there was a certain dissonance there, and then for me, I just took the decision to focus on pedagogy. But so how do you cultivate, maybe that's the question that I want to ask, like, how do you personally cultivate self-care within that paradigm that wants to elevate you into this pedestal that you're the big artist, famous, touring, whatever? How do you deal with that?
yeah, it's a lot of inside work, like to um, I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind is like, be the change you want to see. Very famous person said that once. What is it? Nelson Mandela, I think. Yeah?
Mm.
And of course, that it's easy to say that. Yeah. Also, when we talk about funding structures and getting out of some kind of collective trauma, transgenerational trauma of the artist. But yeah, as I said, the only way that I found so far is just to stay in a regular self contact and just to observe what is happening inside. When am I closing? When am I opening up again? When is my heart closing? When is it opening up again? When is the fire really there, and when is it not there? And in the moment where I've, in my experience, where I feel that the fire is really there, and there is a project or a collaboration or whatsoever that this space opens, if it opens for real, then I have the impression it's not so bound to any authorship, or it's not so bound to any kind of system that I need to attach to. But then like if that space really opens, then it's just, then there is the flow. Then I have the feeling that my system is nourished then in a way, in a deeper way. So there's enough love then that I'm getting, that I don't have to look for some people pleasing, that I don't have to look for pleasing the audience, or pleasing the curators, or pleasing whatsoever, because the energy fulfills itself. It's fulfilled in itself in a way. And those are the moments that I find really precious, to find that. It's the same when performing, and in the end of the performance, if I really need the applause, so that my performing process is rounding itself up, it's a different question if I need the applause or if I don't need the applause. And of course, it's nice to have the applause. And in one way, also the let's say the energy in the space might fulfill itself, because the applause is part of the audience and stuff like that. But at the same time, what I experienced a lot lately is that the best thing for me to finish a performance was mostly in silence, and to just let all the information land. And then all of a sudden, the applause was like, it was great that it was there, but it was not really necessary anymore. And that made me think a bit, like, what is happening there? Like, why all of a sudden I don't really have the same need for the applause, like being attached to the applause, for example. And that really comes out of that space where, okay, the performance that I just made, it rounded itself up. The energy it could settle itself. I don't need a confirmation that it was good, that I did well. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's yeah. When I hear you, I mean, you opened for me the perspective to see the similarity and not the dichotomy between the artist and the teacher. Because when I think about it, of course, there is this song from Bob Dylan that's like, you're gonna have to serve somebody. No matter what, you're gonna have to serve somebody. You can be the king, you can be whatever. You're gonna have to serve somebody. And as a teacher, it's true that like you can also be like kind of the slave of your audience, of your students, and you have to kind of make sure that you're being liked by your students. But I feel that like similar to what you said, that the moments where I feel like, okay, I'm in the right place, is the moment that I'm really anchored and connected to the why question, and that when the why is clear, then things are flowing. And And yeah, and when you describe this thing that you're doing with your student, I can super identify with that, with the importance, because that's somehow, I don't know why, but intuitively, I was doing it in every dance education that I've ever taught. And sometimes, you know, with students who are very young, it's very intimidating. It's like, leave us alone. We don't want to know why. We just want to sweat and dance.
What do you mean by the why question?
The why question, like, why am I doing what I'm doing?
Mm.
You know, like this kind of deep existential question of like, yeah, I'm here. I have this time given to me, and like, why do I teach, or why do I make art? And I think that when this is clear, as you said, like, then you don't need to defend the project. You are the project, kind of. And maybe that's what makes it flow. Yeah, like effortlessly. You just get the funding. You don't need to fight for your funding, or
yeah. I have the feeling that besides the why question, an important one is also the how question. So how do I do the things that I do? And that kept me busy also for a long time now, because I have the feeling that the how question is still diving a little bit deeper into the subject, in terms of understanding habits that I'm having, understanding a bit like what are the loops that are coming back in a way in the teaching practice, in the choreography, in my personal life, because I mean that's all interwoven. That's a bit the tricky part sometimes, that there's not so much difference between the private life, the teaching life, the choreography life, or other lives, let's say. And mostly when the I don't know, when there is some kind of flow or success in one aspect of my life, then there is mostly the real flow in the other aspect as well. So if there is a private flow, there is the workflow. And yeah, in that way the how question enters in every aspect. And so how am I living a relationship? How am I living the relationship in my private life? How am I living the relationship to my collaborators in my work life? And there are so many parallels that appear. And then the interesting thing for me is also that it's not as time consuming anymore, because if I see the parallels in all these aspects of my life, then there is one root mostly that appears, that I just have to look at, and then it kind of the problem solves itself in many of those areas in my life. If that root is found, if it's about me having a problem with I don't know, somebody giving me structures and wanting me to fit inside frames, well, that can happen in a relationship, and that can happen in my job life as well, that I'm starting to have aversions towards being put in a frame. So if I find that root, then I don't need to solve it here, and it's going to be very overwhelming if I have to solve it here and here and here and here, because I don't realize that it has only one root. And that's what the how question also brought me to.
Yeah, you know, I can resonate with that. I mean, I think that there is, you know, I've been grappling with the question of how much dance as a practice can inform the way we behave in the world. And there was some years that I was very convinced that, you know, like, okay, dance translates directly, you know, like we practice something, we have these embodied experiences, and then we pick it up, you know. I mean, I've been also doing a lot of I've been training and dancing and teaching for years contact improvisation, which is very much like a relational practice. So that was also like, in that context, it's even more clear. And then I went kind of to the opposite side of saying like, look, you can be a really great dancer that knows how to communicate, but you can be a fucking asshole in your personal life, and that has no connection. And now I think that it's more like what I see now, and I don't know if you would agree or not, but I see it kind of more as a, the body is like, working with the body offers a certain transparency that the mind can like that we normally, the mind is more like a trickster, you know, you can trick us, but the body kind of just shows things very obviously. So, you know, like, so if somebody puts their hand on my body and they start to push me in a certain direction, and I don't want to go, I have to invest tension. So like it's very obvious, okay, like that's the physical reality. And that's also like very often in the relation, you know, like my wife offer a certain perspective. If I want, if I disagree, I have to engage with some form of tension, rather than if I just let go and follow her and see where can we meet in a, where can I join around the energy that she is proposing and avoid conflict, for example. So the body shows it very clearly, but if I really want to apply it in my life, that's like, wow, I have to really practice it. And I think that that's what, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I agree that there is a certain moment that they can come together, but I really feel like that everything that, like, you, if you really want to, as you said, like to be the change that you want to see in the world, or to, you know, to walk to walk the walk and not just talk the talk, it's like you really have to be focused on that, because it's like, you know, there's like a lot of illusions and traps within this kind of fantasy world, at least for me in the dance world, that we can really fall into and think that, yeah, I'm doing very deep work, and then at the end it's like you realize I'm just stuck in the same patterns. I don't know, what do you think?
It makes me like, while you were talking now and having that hand here and push, I started really feeling it in my body also, like what you were talking about. And then that reminds me again also of the importance of the body in general. Or I don't really want to, it's a bit difficult, of course, with language to express what I really want to say. In terms of, or probably, or what I also feel that you are saying, in terms of going into the dichotomies or polarizing between mind and body again, because of course they are, like, it's the same system, they are connected, and it's good to have it in words, that there is, sometimes it feels like a difference, but in fact not so much. But what I wanted to say is that when you put your hand here, you were pushing, and then tension coming up, and I started feeling it in my body. It reminded me of the wisdom that is there, in the way that even when we are in a conversation like this, that to see and to observe how does not only my ears, how do they listen, or how does my mind listen, or how does my body listen if I'm in a conversation, or just my whole system. So it reminded me of the quality of listening, and the quality of talking, and to which is such an incredibly important topic for me at this moment, also when we are in the midst of a war, a pandemic, social distancing, and all that. When it's a lot about where do we meet, and where do we not meet? How do we listen to each other, and how can that information really land also in the cells in the body that we hear from the other one? Or do I understand the moments where I was not listening, or where I just couldn't listen because there was too much information given, or there was information given that was just overwhelming me? And how to find out those moments of, like, where was I not able to listen anymore? Or where was the information not landing anymore, but just staying up here? And I was like, yeah, I understand. But it's just like, no, there's already too much stress that built up, and that's the self-contact again. That's again when the fire is rather like this, or when the space is rather like this. I have the feeling then to and there I'm coming back also to physical practices, or to dance practice, or teaching choreography and all that, because that is also the practice on on the awareness of what we are born with, like the material side of us, the body, that allows us that kind of deeper listening. If the information landed really in the body, really in the cells, and I think physical practices, dance, can really help with that as well.
Mm. Mm. You know, I think that what this conversation is pointing out towards, and that's something that I've been pondering for many years, and I still don't have a clue, is the dichotomy between nature and culture. You know, like, because like the restoring back to the body wisdom, kind of like, you know, even just this thought that the body has a wisdom, it's already kind of pointing up into the direction. You know, like that kind of this kind of natural phenomena just knows things. And yeah, if I would cultivate a quality that I can really get in tune into this kind of, let's say, this physical body. And I agree with you that the body-mind separation is a construct. I think that it's not reality. But on the level of discussing those ideas, it's a very different thing to say, yeah, you know, like, okay, you know, I hear what you say, but my gut feeling tells me something else, or like I understand what you're saying and it makes sense. It's a different things, no?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I would say that, like, I'm curious about the possibility of integration, which for me it's very not clear how and why, and like maybe why yes, but how is very not clear how to integrate those things, because yeah, the body does have a lot of, like, there is a certain wisdom that I can connect to you, but also sometimes I feel that when I go deep into the body, I cannot find morality, and that's where I need to restore into the mind. But when I restore into the mind, then sometimes I get disconnected from feelings, and that can distort my sense of morality. And there is this kind of tensions pulling in opposite directions. And that's a problem that for me personally, it's very difficult to understand how to engage with. So maybe as a question, what do you mean when you say like wisdom, body wisdom?
What I'm busy with since, I don't know, probably since the beginning of my artistic practice as a child already, is something that I started understanding now as the states of being moved. So what is the state of being moved? What is that state where, like we said before about the fire, where that spark comes? What is that place that is first maybe a void or the unknown, and then all of a sudden there is like this spark coming out that triggers or causes a movement, the voice, me speaking up when it's needed to speak up, me burning for a project and all that. So this state of being moved is something that follows me, as I said, like since my childhood in a way, of which in other words can be called like a flow state or a trance state even. And it's something that is really there from early on, where I was like spinning in my mother's kitchen and like looking at the floor, and everything was really fast, and I was getting into this kind of state where all of a sudden things just started happening by themselves, and like more involuntary movements happening, and this kind of unknown area. And that always went quite deep, and I never understood why that was touching me so much. Later on, I found it back again, for example, in folk dance or in folk music. So in the countryside where I'm coming from in Upper Austria, I was part of this. I'm still part of a folk dance group, and then there was a sense of community. There was these folk dances that happened, and they are done mainly to, well, people are gathering and a tradition is kept alive. But an aspect that was lying behind for me all the time was that there was something that touched me much deeper, that all of a sudden, while we were doing those dances, which are sometimes quite repetitive, because I mean, it's a beautiful nature of a lot of folk dances that they are quite simple, so that everyone can join, old people, young people, whatever. And in that way, it's easy to get into a repetitive mode also. And again, there, this state of being moved started happening. Then I also started being interested artistically, like within my stage performances, in these kind of traditions, rituals, in folk culture. And then by kind of distilling it and putting it inside the stage performances and through the research, it got more and more interesting to see that okay, there is a form now. So through the form, I'm getting into this being moved state through repeating a certain form. But then there is also these other ways where this some of the stories, for example, of the Schuhplattler, of a traditional dance from like Austria, Bavaria, Switzerland. And there's many stories about these kind of folk dances where sometimes they say originally somebody would just get up, for example, in a farmer's wedding and be drunk or possessed by the spirit or whatsoever you would call it. And out of exactly that spark, out of that spontaneity that arises, get into this state of being moved. And out of that, the form develops. So that I find really interesting that we have on one hand form that brings us into a flow or into a state of being moved. And we have the state of being moved, which creates later than the form. And that is, and the state of being moved in itself is also interesting in the way that I deal with myself on a daily basis. On what based, how do I make decisions? How do I make decisions on where to go or which project to follow or to cultivate that fire? And if that decision making is mainly based, let's say on like the logics or on how a career should be built up on these kind of structures, then in my experience, soon enough there will be kind of a Sackgasse or like a dead end to it. But if that decision making comes out of a state of being moved, like deeper inside, then it might not always be the most logic way to go. Or I might even be in front of a curator's talk and decide not to go in there, because at one moment it feels like, no, that's not the way to go. So it comes from a deeper state. But it brings me somewhere else where actually the path should lead in a way.
I hear an idea that is also, I could put it, like I can call it, it's a romantic idea, like that we can have this ability to be connected to something that just it's almost external to us, almost like it's kind of almost an entity that can guide us into the realization of what need to be realized. And I'm just wondering, how does it trickle down into, when I think about my position in society as somebody who's like has a very creative work in its kind of nature, how does it trickle down to, the working class person who is like stuck in some, I don't know, some construction site, and then there is not so much possibility to even ask this question. But on the other hand, yes, because it is internal and it can be manifested. My father is a farmer, and he used to work in a very close collaboration with one Arabic person who was specializing in building those stone-made. What's the name in English? No, it's like when you cultivate a land to make agriculture, and you build this kind of walls that you can transform a slope into something that will look more like stairs. And this guy used to do it just with stones, with no cement, nothing. So like it's really like a, like a work of art of placing the stones in a way that will actually hold for years. And for sure he was in a flow state when he was doing that things. He was in the zone. He was not just like, so it is accessible, but like, and that's a big topic that I anyhow wanted to talk to you. So maybe we can dive a little bit into that. So could you share, and just like as a starting point for this kind of new topic, just a little bit your work around trance state? What, like, I'll just give it to you. Let's start diving into that.
Yeah, as I mentioned before, it's a topic that interests me for a long time already, or that let's say my system or my body discovered a long time ago as a child. And only later on I started understanding what that state actually is. So through the collaboration with a trance researcher called Corinne Sombrin from France, and with her institute called Trance Science Institute in Paris. Through that work and that collaboration with Corinne, I started understanding more about what was actually happening to me as a child already, and what was happening later as a folk dancer and later as an artist. These states that I constantly started getting intrigued by and interested in. Yeah, so it's really about so basically the work of Corinne, or the speciality of her kind of trance work is the self-induced cognitive trance. So that's what the practice is called.
Could you first define, like, because I think this word could be understood. Could you define what you mean by trance state, or like, so that I can be with you?
So the trance state is often described as like it's a modified state of consciousness. What we are working with the self-induced cognitive trance is a state that is induced by will. So by your own capacity to go into a trance state, rather than being induced by, like, for example, plant medicine, or by somebody else inducing the trance for you, for example. So there is
like hypnosis or something like this, you mean?
In hypnosis, hypnosis is quite similar, quite close to this kind of trance state. They're not completely the same, apparently. Okay. So from what I've been hearing from the scientists we're working with, and with hypnosis you also have the auto hypnosis. So with hypnosis you have a similar possibility to go by will into the hypnosis, or by some practices. With the trance state, it's something that nearly all of us know, actually. All of us have been probably in moments where either you're on a dance floor and you see already how your body starts moving by itself, eventually involuntary movement happening, or
sports is also very common, probably.
Sorry?
Probably sports is also a very common area, like performance.
Is a very common field. You mentioned before handicraft work.
Handcraft, yeah.
Which I found out can be also a very common area where it can appear if you do things in a very repetitive manner, and it's already so much in the body that the body just knows what it's doing, what to do.
Yeah, now you remind me, I worked in kitchens for years, and there you really tap into that in the midst of the service, like your body is like the movements are almost choreographed.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. so and on the level of the brain, there is many explanations also that that can be given, that there is an inhibition of the prefrontal cortex, but all that is also one can read also on the website, for example, of Trance Science, transescience.org, on the level of the research. Corinne comes from the Mongolian tradition. So she used to be a BBC journalist, and then at one point went to Mongolia for field recording, and that's where she met that kind of practice, because she fell in trance during a recording of one of the rituals that she attended. And this whole path brought her to the connection with that shaman that was holding the ritual, which then, after she woke up from a trance again, told her she has to stay now in Mongolia to learn the new tool that she discovered, because she's a shaman now. So there is the belief that everyone that can fall in trance is a shaman. Yeah. Which later on for Corinne was important to really make a difference, because she always says, for example, also that she's not a shaman because now she's living in France and she's not part of the culture anymore. She's not wearing the traditional clothes anymore and all that. So what is interesting for me inside this practice is also that, first of all, within the workshops that I'm giving together with Corinne, it's possible within 2 weekends to reconnect to that state of trance that the brain or the body actually knows, and to learn how you can self-induce it. That's why it's called self-induced cognitive trance. Yeah.
Simon, I just want to pause you for a second, because I want to ask one question in order to follow you a little bit more precisely. It's okay?
Yeah.
So, I mean, there is something in the paper that you've sent me that I've been reading before the podcast, that you're describing that there is like a kind of a no trance state. There is like, let's call it like light trance state, or what we call flow, and then there's this deep trance state. Could you maybe try to find words to articulate the differences that you find within your own experiences and within what the research that you've been doing, and is this and do this self-induced cognitive trance that you're talking is just a doorway into this possibility, and the depth will just, let's say, will be determined by the practitioner experience, coincidence, environment, etc., or is it just different, or is it really specifically to go into what you describe as deep trance? So, if you found so far the conversation meaningful, please consider to share the episode with others and click the like button. This small action might seem meaningless, but they are the fuel that helps the podcast project to keep moving forward. Your attention and time is highly valued, and we would love to hear more about the insights you might have from listening to this episode. And please consider to subscribe to the channel to be notified for all future uploads.
So what the research that was done, for example, with Corinne and other trances, and together with neuroscientists, what it shows is so that there is an ordinary state of consciousness, which is, well, the state that we are in, let's say, most of the time, and then there is a state of consciousness that is connected to the trance state, or to a flow state. A lot of times they say that the flow state is like a light state of trance. Yeah. And then there is the deeper states that have been measured. And in a subjective experience, I can also feel like when there is rather like a light state, or when there is an ordinary state, or when there is a deeper state of trance. In a deeper state of trance, what happens is that there is involuntary movement happening. There is a a decrease of so there is the sensation of pain changes, for example. There can be pain in the body, like physical pain that I felt before, that decreases when I'm in a trance state. And the perception of time and space changes as well. So those are some of the characteristics that happen in a deep state of trance, and that are also characteristic for a self-healing process that comes into place.
Okay, no, it gives me a clear image now. And now when you were
when we talk about the wisdom of the body, what is happening is, because there is involuntary movement that starts happening, the body starts regulating whatever needs to be regulated in that moment. So it starts detecting certain tensions in the body, like when somebody did this before to you and you actually wanted to meet the confrontation and you actually didn't finish a process that you wanted to finish, and something is like maybe blocked inside, then in the trance state, the body starts expressing it. It's a lot about expression. So it starts expressing maybe a trauma, maybe something that happened that didn't finish itself. And therefore, going into a self-healing also.
Yeah, I mean, it funny. It's like first, when you were saying it, suddenly I kind of realized, okay, one experience that I had could be really categorized as that in the studio. Most of the experiences that I can relate to that kind of state are I think what you would call like an altered state of consciousness because of the result of plant medicine or other psychedelic experiences. And funny enough, the experience that I had in the studio was I was working with one choreographer, and we had a task during the creative process of just improvising a solo for half an hour. And in this process, I was really, really intimidated by this choreographer. He was not the most kind person. And the solo that I did was kind of a rebellion in the studio to kind of claim my space and say like, okay, I can be myself in that process. And one thing that I did, I started to talk about how zebras, they are using shaking to heal themselves. Or like that not to heal themselves, but just to resolve trauma. So then if they are being chased by a predator and they survive, then they shake it out and then they can go back and then don't pass the trauma to the next zebra. So they can just, and maybe it's because their environment is so unpredictable and dangerous that like if they don't deal with it like this, they will just be paralyzed and actually will die much quicker.
Yeah, that's what happens to humans.
What? That we don't process it.
We don't process it, no.
Yeah, because we've managed to domesticate nature to such a degree, so there's no in necessity to that. Maybe that's one way of looking at it. But
and what sometimes they bring us, because the example that you talked about now with the zebra, it comes a lot in the TRE, in the practice, the Tremoring practice.
What is TRE? Sorry,
I forgot now by who it is, but that practice is based on exactly that discovery of what animals do. So the predator comes, it gets attacked, there is a trauma, it survives, and it starts tremoring, it starts shaking. And through the shaking, as you said, it kind of regulates instantly. It regulates that kind of possibly traumatic experience, but it's not going to be traumatic because it's immediately evacuated in a way. And that practice is exactly on that topic. And one example that they bring within that is also that, for example, the observation that in war areas, when there is a bomb alarm and people go to the cellar, that sometimes the children, they would shake a lot. It's still that wisdom is still in their body, so they would tremor and shake, and then when the alarm is gone again, they would go out and start playing football again. But the grown-ups, they would sit in the cellars and mostly not have any physical reaction or hold it back. The same that emergency, when there is an emergency or an accident, if you have been hit by a car or something, people sometimes they're tremoring, but we are so educated that tremoring is something not good, that mostly we stop it, and in that way.
Yeah, no, yeah, it's yeah, I think it's also like, I mean, there is also something that could be scary in entering such a place, especially like when you, I mean, if I recall my psychedelic experiences, that was very clear. Okay, I'm gonna go into some journey, and then it's like you kind of prepare for that.
Yeah.
But in the experience that I had in the studio, that was triggered by tickling. So yeah, funny enough. So I've developed a little solo that was me talking about the zebra story and explaining it, and at the same time shaking. That was kind of the frame of the material. But the choreographer was never satisfied with how I executed the movement, and he wanted me to go into something that will be way more physical and less that we don't need to see and imagine it, but that we can actually, that it's just there, that what I'm talking about, I'm doing. So in order to provoke it, at a certain point, he just asked people to start tickle me while I do it. And and after we did it maybe for half an hour without stop. And at a certain moment, my body was so full of stimulus from this tickling. And there is something about tickling that on one hand, it's like, you know, it's semi-pleasant, but also very invasive. And at a certain point, I just realized that there was nobody next to me, but my body just kept, the feeling of being tickled kept being present. So, and there was nobody touching me anymore, but it was, the body was full of that. Body, the mind, I don't know. And then when I was moving and improvising, there was no control. As you said, like the movement was involuntarily. The solo came out of my body. I didn't do the solo. That would be the way to subjectively describe it. But I couldn't reproduce that. And then the conclusion of the choreographer was that I'm a bad performer. But of course, he didn't have any tools how to guide me into that.
Yeah.
So could you describe a little bit what is this self-induced cognitive trance? Do you have experience with that kind of practice physically, or like, is it something you're guiding and watching, or like what?
Basically, a few years ago, I think it was 3 or 4 years ago, I was working together with a group called Ballet from Brussels, and it's a dancer, an anthropologist, and a filmmaker, and they worked a lot around these topics of modified states of consciousness and artistic practice, and that's where we met. Also, our interests kind of met, and then they introduced me to Corinne, which I then invited to Vienna, and I invited her to this to give a workshop of cognitive trance in the Ecstatic Body Festival that we did in Tanzkoti a few years ago. And that's where my first meeting happened. I didn't really have the time to do a workshop with her before, so I thought, okay, I invite her and then I can do the workshop.
Practical thing.
Practical, yeah. And after the workshop, and it was really, for me, it was quite easy to dive into that state and to understand or to feel the self-induction process. And that's when we then, after the workshop, she asked me if I was interested to also work together, because her interest was to work together with scientists and doctors and with artists, because that's where she started seeing a lot of potential also of bringing the work further, and so I became kind of the bridge between the artistic world and the trance research in that way. And bit by bit, by the research, we started understanding that, well, the trance state is something very present in artistic practice already, and that the work is mainly on making people aware that there is something like a trance state that they are already experiencing, and how to get into that state in a faster way. What you described before about the tickling, that could be the equal eventually of, let's say, the whirling practice or the or other practices that need a certain amount of preparation, and then you enter a deeper state of trance. So mostly there has to be a certain amount of preparation physically, or there has to be some kind of medicine to get into that depth of a trance experience. But what is with the self-induced cognitive trance is that that you learn how to really start it by will. So you think of like, okay, now I want to go into a trance state, and you reach that depth within like a second, let's say. And that is very helpful also for any.
Wait, sorry. You cannot just say that and keep going. What do you mean by that? No, I'm super curious. I don't know if you have more words to describe, or if it's something of some kind of I don't know if it's like a secret brand that you have to be initiated. But like,
it's not a secret brand. You can do the workshops. Like in France at the moment, there is every week there is a workshop of that. And
no, I'm asking just because I have a generally skeptical mind, and when I hear something like this, and I just have to ask, like, wait, what is that?
Yeah. I guess that's why it was important also to work together so much with science on that research, like for Corinne, for example, because there is a lot of like even in the science world, there was a lot of resistance for so long to work on topics like meditation, shamanic trance, and all that. And now there is this big boom of research that is done on meditation, where there's amazing things that have been found out that that Buddhist monks knew for centuries already. And the same was now with shamanic trance. That now there is official protocols, scientific, like neuroscientific research on shamanic trance. Those protocols are out now that kind of prove scientifically that shamanic trance exists. And like with EEG, with other kinds of measurements, and on a personal level, it's like this, that as I said before, the state itself, everyone knows. So it's mainly about the reconnection to it, and it's mainly about finding some kind of entrance into that state. And there is practices that are that there is practices that we know, like I said before, like with the whirling, but it's also possible to like how we work in the cognitive trance practices, that there is a sound loop, a special kind of music that Corinne developed, and that in the first place gives the access to the trance state. And then slowly, bit by bit, it's about making people independent, so that nobody gets dependent on that music. But by going into the trance state, so a person might realize that every time I enter, there is a certain movement that appears. Like it can be the tremoring, for example, or it can be some kind of tick of the head or something. And then inside you start to connect that movement to the trance state. So later on, that when the music is not there anymore, that movement helps to get into the trance state.
And again, now what you're mentioning is this kind of deep trance that you are really going into a place of involuntary movement.
Yeah.
And yeah, because in that state, I feel like, I don't know, in that state, I feel like you, I mean, I don't know if you could, wait, I'll try to formulate the question. Why should we explore that? Why should we explore we explore it in the beginning? And maybe what I'm trying to point is like, because, you know, like if I'll just take it to something that is maybe more mundane and that could be maybe understood also by the wider audience that might listen to this conversation, if I'm thinking about like just kind of this light flow state that you're like in your body and things are going as you expect, and it enhances performance. And so it could be definitely used as something positive, but it could also be used to something that is not necessarily positive. If I think about it kind of in a you know, if I think about it like in how to utilize it in a negative way, so I think like, I don't know, I can imagine that somebody who is a trained martial artist and can enter this kind of flow state can really inflict much more efficiently damage on other people, because now he's super connected to his being. It's like kind of this uh, you know, romantic ideas about martial art and how can you be in the moment while you're chopping your enemy's head. And that could be one example that this thing maybe will separate from morality. And then I'm asking, but on the other hand, you say like, hey, it could also be used for healing. But so what is the why for you? Why? So you said like, okay, it's something that you experienced as a kid, and that's you wanted to understand it. But what is the context? And that's maybe the question of like, how does this relate to the community and to society and to like the bigger frame where this research is situated?
Yeah, these practices, they are coming from the community, they are coming from society, and you see them in nearly all cultures. Nearly every culture has a practice like this that makes people go into a certain flow or a certain trance state. Um, you have Sufi rituals where people are dancing in a circle, and there is one person of the village that is sick, and they put that person in the middle. So and everyone else, through the chanting and through the moving, they go into a state of flow or trance. You have it. I mean, the interesting thing for me was to see, do we have it in Austria?
Okay.
And then to see what does what do those folk dances have to do with it, and then discovering, oh, but we also have a dance, for example, that is whirling or turning, which is called the waltz. Yeah, but nobody would really practice a waltz as a transcendental practice or as a practice of trance or flow. But everyone who has danced waltz for a while knows that there is something that is happening. There's something that is bringing me a bit into a state of like dizziness, meaning that there is between the border of the known and the unknown, and there is something that is really renewing and refreshing about that state. I mean, some people go bungee jumping, other people are doing downhill, whatever. So there is always this meeting that is like a fundamental thing that we obviously need to meet the unknown. That's also what the trance state is doing, or what those practices sometimes imply also. And when I talk about involuntary movement, well, we can talk about involuntary movement, but we can also talk about that our physical body starts showing what it needs. And it's like very simple. It comes down to that. A lot of people have it by nature that their body shows them what it needs. And it doesn't always need to be through pain or sickness. It can also be through a sound that is appearing, a movement that is coming, and to follow that. So if that question to my body is like, your body, what do you need at this moment? Or how are you? And the deeper listening starts happening, then it starts showing it. And it's not so special in a way, because if I observe, I don't know, people where I come from, some of my grandmother's friends, they have it by nature that they have this kind of access to their physical expression, or their involuntary movement side, or their self-regulation side.
Yeah, I mean, when I hear you speak and I think about this context in where our culture, like the state of things in like Western culture, and yeah, it sounds to me that there is a certain integral spirit in this project that tries to take something like an artistic frame, which which normally would translate to something that is not necessarily connected to the community, but it's more like, you know, connected to consumerism and production and creation, and something that we can be entertained with, also cognitively, aesthetically, and to kind of bring it back, or re-establish it again as something that could be relevant, not only as something that we watch, but as something that we might want to experience and to cultivate in our lives. And I think that it's what I hear that is also very interesting is, like, what is those wisdom in those traditions that you say, like, okay, every tradition has something like that, but maybe also the understanding that that the tradition is not the thing itself. It's just the frame where it happens, and that's why we can also maybe decentralize it from that. As you say, like, maybe you don't need to wear the traditional costumes, and maybe that's the question that is kind of necessary in our age, where, like, that we also need to question a lot of tradition because of their let's say abusive or problematic nature. And bring it back into
that's also the beauty that I found with the cognitive trance practice, or with also in the love for these states of being moved, and why I'm also teaching that besides the cognitive trance workshops, I'm doing this being moved workshops that come more out of the how can I be moved by my self-contact? How can I be moved by the question, how am I? By the question of what does my body need at this moment? Because it's kind of a necessity also, I find nowadays, when everything is getting quite complex sometimes, to just break it down to the most essential and to just come back to here, and to then see again that the complexity that I'm perceiving can sometimes be very, very simple, like the dervish philosophy, where you have like the calm center inside, and outside is chaos. Like when you're spinning and you open your eyes, everything is kind of chaos, but still inside can be this calm center, like a hurricane in the middle.
Interesting. It's so okay. So we have this possibility to find something innate. Let's agree on that.
Yeah.
Something innate that can teach us something about our bodies, and like what we authentically need, and that has some kind of a healing potential. So, but at the same time, there is the possibility to educate the body and to become more competent in feeling yourself, and that puts into a question, like, what's the relationship between education and freedom, maybe? Because I mean, I'm hearing what you're saying, that okay, or maybe I don't understand correctly, but that maybe what you are trying to teach people is to get into this state, and this state has no particular form that is necessary, that needs to be embodied. It's the ultimate authentic expression, but there is something about the ability to become connected to your body that happens also with the refinement of execution of movement. Again, like, why to do thousands of hours of Tai Chi forms?
Yeah.
Where do you see, or how do you situate yourself in that kind of problem? Or you understand my question? Is it clear enough?
The question, yeah. It's it's something that I can totally relate to, as it is part of the practices that I'm doing as well, to see, let's say, the example of a warm-up. Like, what is a warm-up there for? It's there to prepare me for the day, or for the rehearsal, or for whatever I have to do in that moment. So maybe there is practices, maybe there is certain forms like yoga or Tai Chi or whatsoever that I learned, and that I understood that they helped me to prepare for the day or for a certain situation. And that would be the form part. That would be the formal part, let's say. And then there is also the possibility to just, for example, start with that question of like, okay, dear body, what do you need at this moment? And then to see what starts moving. And sometimes it's exactly that form that comes out of that. Sometimes it's exactly that form that the body needs. I mean, that's the experience. I'm talking about the experience now from the workshops that I'm giving. Sometimes people go exactly into that form, and then that's what's needed. And sometimes it's something completely different, but to accept that something different can come up, a form that I don't know yet. Sometimes it's really weird, the movements that are starting to happen, because it's like some kind of combination of like sound, movement, breath, and nobody, you didn't see that in any technique or practice before. So it's about trusting that what comes up is okay. That's what you need at this moment, even if it's really weird. But that can be your warm up. And so it's really about the work of confidence and trust within that, and seeing that, okay, yes, there is forms, and they do me well sometimes, or they're good for me sometimes. But then to also realize when I'm actually caught into like repeating forms that somebody else invented, and that, and where does the deeper listening happen? To do I really need that right now, or do I actually need something else? And the trust in finding your own technique, practices, forms, and so ever, at any moment and any day.
Yeah, it sounds like it really sounds like the tension between like progressive and conservative thinking, what you're describing to me. Yeah, because like there is a certain, I mean, especially you see it, I think, with people who are really fan of traditional martial art. I'm personally not a big fan of that. I practice more contemporary martial arts. But somebody who kind of been doing a certain tai chi that comes from, I don't know, like there is always like some kind of a romantic story of the wooden mountains or something like that. And yeah, like you've been embodying this thing that has been passed from a student to a teacher for years, and there's like, and then that's a very conservative act to say like, yeah, I'm just standing in this footstep of this giant teacher, and I'm just taking the knowledge that I have been passing. And the opposite extreme that you're saying is like, just be with what there is, and that makes sense completely. And I think that maybe why it's important as a physical practice is because I think, as you said, like it offers us a way to like shaken everything and just see what else could be experienced. And I do it sometimes with my student. I give them like I have this kind of educational program in Vienna, so I work with the same people for a long time. So I kind of ran out of warm-ups ideas very often. So then I just tell, okay, warm up, do whatever you need. And then it's interesting to see that some people, they're like, okay, so then I'll do certain exercises that I know. And then I sometimes I point out on that and say like, hey, try to see if you can actually listen to something that is not cognitive, like that it's not a decision that you're doing, and then you're like, I'm going to place my body in that decision, but that the process could be starting from a point of, no, I don't know what should happen.
Yeah.
And then maybe I can discover something new. But also, sometimes you also do nonsense. And I think that's also good to acknowledge. No, like sometimes you think, yeah, I'm doing something that is good for me, but and it points up to the question, is this something that we can learn and can refine, or it's just, like, is it an innate skill that we just need to remember, or is it something that could be cultivated through a process of education and you can become better in listening to your body? What do you think?
I have to go to the toilet before I answer that.
Okay, no problem. Simon, just to now that we have this short pause before we pick it up, just to say we are already like 1 hour 25. I'm gonna slowly wrap it up.
Yeah.
There's many things we didn't talk about, but that just means that we can meet again.
Yeah. Okay.
You remember the question, or
yeah,
should I repeat it? Okay.
Yeah, please repeat it.
Yeah. So what I was curious is to understand or to hear your perspective, whether this innate state that I can listen to my body and then something authentic that has value and that could serve me is something that is just in me and need to be discovered, or is it something that could also be cultivated and improved by a process of education? So again, like this tension between culture and nature that comes up very often. And I'm curious, is it something that you see an integration between the both, or is it something that you like what? How do you understand it from your experience teaching? And
that exactly brings me to the word teaching. So I'm not really using that so much because I feel like there's nothing really that I'm teaching in that sense when I when I facilitate workshops. But there is more that I'm trying. There is this love, or that I'm trying to hold, to provide a space, a presence where things can appear and happen. So like my main work of preparation is to see that how can I cultivate my presence, how can I cultivate my fire for that moment and for that space. And also I see myself more like as a reminder of things, and sharing something that people know already, actually. So it's not that I'm not telling so many new things in that way, but it's more that sharing information that most people have experienced already or have in their system already, but maybe it just needs a small reminder, or it needs maybe a different entrance or a different perspective. So this is rather the way that I see it, what I'm trying to go for. And then in terms of culture and nature, and I mean, what I find interesting, for example, with the being moved practices is that there is this learning without learning process. So there is some kind of like the question of how am I can bring me into emotions. It can bring me to being moved, like my body is moving, and if I then, and it's a conscious process. So as it is a conscious process, I have the possibility to observe and to listen. So I'm getting information because my body starts moving, because emotions are starting to come up. So in that way, it's I start discovering movements, or I'm getting teachings that are not given to me in a normal teaching way, but that are just appearing outside of from within me. And that's an interesting point. But now we are still putting in opposition the learning, this kind of process where something appears from within me, and the process where something comes from the outside, like a form or some kind of, like you said before, Tai Chi or some kind of martial art technique. But in the end, it's not so much about creating an opposition between the two of them, because both are possibilities, and it's more about seeing when do I need what, like when does the form serve me, and when does that listening to what wants to happen serve me. And sometimes it's really good, like if I'm in a moment of like instability and everything is already so shaky and confusing, then sometimes it's really good to just have that form that and maybe that form even appeared from a practice that came from within. So maybe I even invented that form, and then I can go back to it again.
Yeah, I think it's the spirit inside the form. That's how I see it. Like, because there's certain things that I've learned, especially I would say in the world of martial art, because there's such a clear utility. That's like I say, like, okay, I could have spent hours not discovering that precise mechanics that has been researched for years by people who have been specializing in that. But still, the moment that I actually learn it is not the moment that somebody tells it to me and I see it. The learning process happens internally, and it's invisible to the naked eye, and it's something that involves exactly what you're describing, connecting into this state of kind of creative emerging, like something new could click. Maybe also we can call it, I don't know, kind of evolution, and that's something that even though that sometimes I teach very, very precise movement, and sometimes I teach things that are very, very up for interpretation, I still see this common thing that, like, the moment that somebody kind of something clicks, that's internal. It has nothing to do with me as a teacher.
Yeah.
And that's maybe the meeting point. Simon, we've been talking for an hour and a half, and I would love to actually pick your mind for many other topics that, I mean, actually, we didn't talk about almost anything that I wrote. And that's a bit of a shame, because I also there's many other things that I would like to discuss with you. But I think I will just leave the invitation to come again to this space if you would be curious. And I would be happy first to give you some space to tell a little bit more about what you're doing. And if people that are hearing the podcast are curious to meet, see, hear, read about things you're doing. So please, if you could take a few moments to share a little bit.
Yeah, so I'm busy as a choreographer, as a dancer, as a musician, and a workshop facilitator, teacher, if you want. And to make it very concrete, next week I'm going to teach in Tanzquartier. And I'm on tour again with my performances, which are connected to a large extent to the topics that we've been talking about today. There is even one performance that is called Being Moved, and the workshops that I'm doing at the moment, most of them are also called the states of being moved. And what also fascinates me at the moment very much is really this topic of being moved, trance, flow. The connection to traditional dance still fascinates me a lot, and the topic of celebration. So the art of celebration, the reconnection to joy, especially in a moment where there was not so much parties happening in the last years, and to understand and feel again what is the value of celebration, what is the value of joy in the daily life, and what is the variety, the diversity of celebration also that we can access. That it's not just about that celebration does not need to be only about happy and forced laughing, but that it can really about celebrating each moment, and what does that actually mean to celebrate. This is one very important aspect at the moment for me.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So are you going to be there in Tanzquartier for the next 2 weeks?
I'm going to be there for 1 week.
1 week.
There will be a morning practice and a workshop right after.
Okay.
I'm going to teach.
Yeah, I'm just after you appearing there. I will try to come. My mother is coming on Sunday, so let's see if I can. But yeah, I would be happy to meet you also in the studio.
Great.
Hey, thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure to pick up your mind and pick up your mind body and hear what you have to say and think. And yeah, I do hope to have more space to exchange with you.
Yeah.
In the future.
Same here. And I just for the end, I would like to just acknowledge the people that also I brought in the course of these podcasts in terms of like the people that I've been learning a lot in the last years, which are Corinne Sombrin, and there is also Caroline Maria Wiedmer, that have been amazing guides in the last years, and that brought me to also where I am right now, including my partner, Hanna Shakti Bühler.
I would put all the links in the show notes so that people can also look at the references of, you know, that you've mentioning, and yeah, that people could have access to further reading. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And yeah, until the next time.
Till next time.
If you want to see more precious and insightful moments, make sure to check our short clips playlist. To see longer interviews, check out the full episode playlist just below it. And to be notified for all future videos, click the subscribe button and don't forget to hit the notification bell. See you on the next episode.